Hey, my friends, how are you feeling tonight? Tonight we are drifting back, way back, to a time of long ships and sagas, of gods and giants, but we're not heading for the battlefield. Oh no. We're seeking out a quieter corner of this often misunderstood world. Picture this. You're nestled in a small wooden settlement. The scent of wood smoke hangs in the crisp air, and instead of the clash of steel, you hear the gentle rhythmic rasp of a tool on bone. We're diving into the surprisingly peaceful craft of Viking comb makers. Now, considering the average Viking lifespan and the general, shall we say, robustness of their conflict resolution techniques, you probably wouldn't survive this particular historical deep dive if we were actually there. But here in the soft glow of your screen, you're perfectly safe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're probably thinking, Vikings combs, really? And I get it. The image that springs to mind when you hear Viking is usually some burly bearded fellow horned helmet glinting, though fun fact, those horned helmets are largely a romantic invention of the 19th century, not historically accurate, for the Viking age. Warrior axe in hand, ready to, well, redecorate a monastery, shall we say? And yes, they certainly had their moments of what we might politely call aggressive expansion. Their raids were legendary, striking fear from the coasts of England to the rivers of Russia. But that's only one facet, one very loud, very dramatic facet of a complex and surprisingly sophisticated society. Tonight, we're peeling back that layer of legend, like removing the rough outer bark from a piece of fine antler to find something much more intricate, much more personal, and dare I say, much more boring in the most wonderfully sleep-inducing way. Imagine, if you will, that same Viking, the one from the sagas, fresh from a long sea voyage, or perhaps just a particularly muddy trek to the market. What's one of the first things they might do? Well, after maybe a flagon of ale, they'd likely want to clean up. And the key tool for that, a treasured personal possession, would be a comb. Not just any comb, but often a beautifully crafted object made with care and skill. These weren't just utilitarian bits of plastic stamped out in a factory. These were handcrafted items, symbols of status hygiene, and perhaps even imbued with a little bit of that Viking magic or personal identity. You see, the Vikings, for all their fierce reputation, were actually quite keen on grooming. Archaeological finds have unearthed not just combs, but also tweezers, ear spoons, and razors. They weren't the unkempt barbarians often portrayed in popular culture. In fact, some contemporary accounts from cultures they encountered, like the English, noted the Vikings' rather fastidious habits, including regular bathing and, yes, combing their hair. It might have even made them a bit too popular with the local ladies, much to the chagrin of English men. One 13th century chronicler, John of Wallingford, grumbled that Danish men, thanks to their habits of combing their hair, daily bathing every Saturday, and changing their clothes, frequently managed to undermine the virtue of married women and even seduce the daughters of nobles to be their mistresses. So, you see, a well-groomed Viking was apparently a dangerously attractive Viking. Who knew a comb could be such a potent weapon in the battle of hearts? The craft of comb making then wasn't just some minor hobby. It was a specialized skill, and the products were essential. Think about your own routine. You probably have a comb or a brush you use every day. Now imagine that item also had to be durable enough to last for years, potentially made from materials you or a local artisan had to source and prepare from scratch, and maybe even decorated to show off your personal style or status. Suddenly, that humble comb takes on a new significance. It's a window into the daily lives, the personal habits, and the artistic sensibilities of these fascinating people. The Viking Age, generally considered to span from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century, was a period of incredible movement and change. While the long ships and warriors are what grab the headlines. And to be fair, changing the political and cultural map of Europe is pretty headline-worthy. It was also a time of extensive trade and settlement. Viking towns like Hedeby in modern-day Germany, Birka in Sweden, and Jorvik, York in England were bustling centers of commerce and craft. And in these towns, amidst the blacksmiths, the woodworkers, the leather tanners, and the weavers, you would have found the comb maker. Perhaps not as noisy as the smithy, with its clang of hammer on anvil, nor as fragrant as the tannery, thank goodness for small mercies even in our imagination, but a vital part of the urban fabric nonetheless. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for the Viking expansion was overpopulation, a thirst for adventure, climate change affecting agriculture, or simply the lure of easily acquired wealth through raiding and trading. It was likely a complex mix of all these factors. But whatever the grand geopolitical motivations on the ground in the settlements and farmsteads, life went on. People still needed to eat, to clothe themselves, and yes, to comb their hair and beards. The mainstream historical fact is that these urban centers like Jorvik had distinct areas for specific crafts, indicating a well-organized artisan system. You wouldn't just find one jack of all trades, you'd find specialists. And here's a quirky little tidbit for you. It's believed by some that Vikings might have used special combs to groom their magnificent beards, not just the hair on their heads. Given the importance of beards in Viking culture as a sign of masculinity and status, it makes sense they'd give them some special attention. Imagine the care taken to keep those flowing beards free of, well, bits of last night's feast. A good sturdy comb would have been indispensable. Some sagas even mention heroes being recognized by their distinctive hair or beard, further emphasizing the importance of grooming. You wouldn't want to be the Viking known for having, shall we say, a bird's nest beard when you're trying to impress at the Althing, the annual assembly. It's the little details, isn't it? The kind of everyday concerns that often get lost in the grand narratives of kings and battles, but which tell us so much about what it was truly like to live in that time. And it's in these quiet crafts, these moments of patient creation, that we can find a different kind of Viking story, one that's perhaps a bit more relatable, a bit more human, and for our purposes tonight, perfectly, wonderfully, soporifically boring. So, you're beginning to picture it now, aren't you? The Viking world not just as a backdrop for epic poems, but as a place where ordinary people went about their lives with needs and routines surprisingly similar to our own, albeit with considerably less advanced plumbing. And central to one of those routines, personal grooming, was the comb. It wasn't merely a tool. It was an intimate part of daily existence, something carried, used, and valued. You'd wake up perhaps in a longhouse, shared with several other families, the air thick with the lingering scent of sleep and smoke from the central hearth. After splashing some cold water on your face, reaching for your comb would be a natural, almost instinctual act. These combs played a crucial role in Viking hygiene. In a world without daily showers and an abundance of soap, though they did have soap, often made from animal fat and ash, keeping your hair clean and free of pests was a serious concern. Lice and fleas were, shall we say, unwelcome but common companions in many pre-modern societies. A fine-toothed comb was the first line of defense. Regularly combing your hair could help to remove these little critters and their eggs, preventing infestations that could be not only irritating but also lead to infections if skin was broken by scratching. You can almost feel the satisfying scrape as the teeth pass through thick hair, dislodging any unwanted guests. It's a small act of self-care that would have had a significant impact on comfort and health. Beyond basic hygiene, the condition of one's hair was a visible indicator of social standing and personal pride. Long, well-kept hair was admired in both men and women. For warriors, a magnificent beard and flowing locks could be part of their formidable appearance. Think of the descriptions in the sagas. Heroes are often noted for their striking hair. To maintain such an appearance required effort, and a good comb was essential. It wasn't just about being clean. It was about presenting yourself to the world in a particular way. A tangled matted mess wouldn't exactly scream powerful chieftain or respected shield maiden, would it? It's like today. You wouldn't show up for an important meeting or even a casual coffee looking like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards, unless, of course, that's your specific, carefully cultivated aesthetic. The combs themselves could also signify status. A simple, unadorned comb made of plain bone might belong to a thrall or a poorer farmer, but a wealthy jarl or a successful merchant might sport a comb made of polished antler, perhaps imported intricately carved, with complex knotwork or animal figures, its connecting plates secured with shiny bronze or even silver rivets. The materials used, the complexity of the design, and the quality of the craftsmanship all spoke volumes about the owner's wealth and social position. You could almost read a person's status by the comb they carried. It was a subtle but effective form of social signaling, much like a designer handbag or an expensive watch might be today. Oh, you're still using that walrus ivory comb. How quaint. Mine is reindeer antler. You know, much more exclusive this season. Okay, maybe not quite like that, but you get the idea. These combs were personal items often carried on the person, perhaps in a pouch or tucked into a belt. Many surviving examples have holes drilled into them, suggesting they were hung on a cord, possibly worn around the neck or wrist, ensuring they were always at hand. This intimate connection meant that combs often became deeply personal possessions, perhaps even taking on a sentimental value beyond their practical use or monetary worth. Imagine a young Viking receiving their first adult comb, a sign of coming of age, or a warrior carrying a comb given to them by a loved one. These objects were part of the fabric of life, and as we'll see later, even death. Historians still argue whether some of the very fine-toothed combs found were exclusively for delousing, or if they also served for general grooming and styling of fine hair. Some combs feature teeth of different gauges on opposite sides, one coarse and one fine, suggesting a multi-purpose design, detangling with one side, smoothing and cleaning with the other. It's a practical design solution that speaks to the ingenuity of the craftsmen and the needs of the users. It's the Viking equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, but for your hair. Need to get a knot out, flip it. Worried about nits? Flip it back. Versatile. A mainstream historical fact is the sheer number of combs found in archaeological digs from the Viking Age. Sites like Dublin, York, Jorvik, and Berka have yielded hundreds, even thousands of combs and comb fragments. This abundance tells us they were common, everyday items, not just luxuries for the elite. It also provides archaeologists with a wealth of material to study, offering insights into manufacturing techniques, artistic styles, trade patterns, and even the prevalence of certain animal species based on the raw materials used. Each comb is a tiny piece of a very large historical puzzle. And for a quirky tidbit, some combs have been found with runic inscriptions. These might be the owner's name, a maker's mark, or perhaps even a short charm or magical incantation. Imagine combing your hair with a comb that literally says, "Thor, protect this hair." Or, "Olaf owns this comb, hands off." It adds another layer of personality and belief to these everyday objects. It makes you wonder what you'd inscribe on your comb if you were a Viking. "May my bedhead be ever conquerable," or perhaps, "Beware the fury of a tangled Norseman." The desire for a well-groomed appearance wasn't unique to the Vikings, of course. Ancient Egyptians, Romans, and Greeks all had their grooming tools and rituals. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we might have hypothetically mentioned in another lifetime. Different cultures, different methods, but the underlying human desire to look and feel good seems pretty universal. For the Vikings, though, living in an often harsh northern climate, where one might be bundled in wool and furs for much of the year, the hair and beard were prominent features highly visible, and therefore important to maintain. It was their original statement piece. So as you settle deeper into your own comfortable space, imagine the feeling of that cool, smooth antler or bone in your hand, the slight weight of it, the rhythmic motion of drawing it through your hair, a small centering ritual in a world that was often anything but calm. It's this personal tactile connection to an object that we're exploring tonight, a connection that transcended the mere functionality of the tool and wove it into the very identity of the Viking who owned it. The comb wasn't just about looking good, it was about feeling human, feeling orderly in a world that often felt chaotic. It was a small piece of civilization you could carry with you wherever your longship might take you. Now that you appreciate the why of Viking combs, their crucial role in hygiene, social expression, and just plain looking sharp, let's get into the what. What were these essential tools actually made from? You might imagine wood, and indeed some simpler, perhaps earlier or more expediently made combs could have been fashioned from wood. But wood, while readily available, has its limitations. It can warp with moisture, splinter, and the teeth, if carved finely enough for effective delousing or smooth grooming, could easily break. For a durable, long-lasting, and high-quality comb, the Vikings turned to harder, more resilient materials, primarily bone and antler. Antler, especially, was the material of choice for the finest combs, and not just any antler. Red deer antler was particularly prized. You might be wondering what's so special about red deer antler. Well, it has a wonderfully dense, compact structure. Unlike bone, which has a spongy marrow core, the cancellous bone surrounded by a harder outer layer, the cortical bone antler is solid bone material throughout, at least in its mature state. This solidity means it's strong, less prone to splitting, and can be worked into fine, delicate shapes, like the slender teeth of a comb, without sacrificing too much strength. It's also relatively easy to carve and polish to a smooth, almost luminous finish. Think of it as the ivory of the north, but, from a deer that sheds it naturally every year, which is a rather convenient and sustainable sourcing model if you happen to be a Viking craftsman. Other types of antler were also used, such as elk moose in North America and reindeer. Reindeer antler being somewhat softer and more porous than red deer antler was perhaps more common in the northernmost regions of Scandinavia where reindeer were abundant. However, the archaeological record shows a clear preference for red deer antler when it was available even in areas where it might have needed to be imported or traded over some distance. This preference speaks to its superior working qualities. The mainstream historical fact here is that analysis of the cellular structure of antler artifacts can often pinpoint the species of deer, giving us clues about trade routes and resource availability. It's like a tiny biological fingerprint left on the artifact. Bone, of course, was also widely used, particularly from domesticated animals like cattle and horses, or even large fish. Bone is readily available as a byproduct of butchery, making it a more economical choice than antler, which might need to be specifically hunted or gathered. However, as mentioned, long bones have that marrow cavity. To get flat, solid pieces suitable for comb, making the bone would need to be split, and the thick cortical outer layer carefully worked. This often resulted in smaller, flatter plates than could be obtained from a good tine of antler. These bone plates were frequently used for the side plates of composite combs, which we'll get to later, while antler might be reserved for the tooth plates themselves, where strength and fineness were paramount. You can imagine the Viking craftsman, a discerning connoisseur of animal remains, evaluating a piece of antler. They'd be looking at its size, its curvature, the thickness of the beam and tines. They'd be feeling its weight, tapping it, perhaps listening for the sound that indicates good density and no internal flaws. It's a skill born of experience, knowing which piece will yield the best results, which one will resist splitting when the saw bites, in which one will polish to a pleasing sheen. They'd be the kind of person who could probably tell you the deer's life story just by looking at its shed antler. Ah, yes, this one had a rather stressful autumn 2 years back. See this slight discoloration. Historians still argue whether the collection of shed antlers was sufficient to meet demand, or if deer were actively hunted for their antlers as well as for meat and hides. Shed antlers are typically found in late winter or early spring. While this provides a renewable resource, the quality can vary, and finding enough prime specimens might have been challenging, especially for a busy workshop. Hunting while providing fresh antler still attached to the skull. Velvet antler harvested while still growing is soft and not suitable was a more involved and sometimes dangerous undertaking. It's likely a combination of both methods was employed, depending on local availability and the specific needs of the comb makers. And here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes you find combs made from more exotic materials like walrus ivory or even whalebone. These would have been luxury items indicative of long-distance trade or connections to coastal communities specializing in marine mammal hunting. Walrus ivory sourced from the tusks is incredibly dense and fine-grained, carving beautifully and taking a high polish. It was highly valued throughout the Viking world and beyond. A comb made of walrus ivory would have been a real status symbol, perhaps the ancient equivalent of having the latest smartphone, but much more durable and less likely to need a software update. You could probably pass down your walrus ivory comb for generations. The choice of material wasn't just practical. It also carried symbolic weight. Animals held significant meaning in Norse mythology and culture. The stag with its magnificent crown of antlers shed and regrown each year could symbolize renewal strength and the untamed power of nature. Using antler was in a way harnessing a little piece of that wild spirit, shaping it into an object of personal adornment and utility. It connects the user not just to the craftsman, but also to the natural world from which the material came. So, as you lie there, feeling the soft support beneath you, consider the contrast with the materials we've been discussing. The hardness of antler, the cool smoothness of polished bone. These weren't just inert substances. They were once part of living, breathing creatures imbued with the essence of the forests and tundras of the Viking lands. The craftsman wasn't just a shaper of objects. They were a transformer, taking a piece of the wild and through skill and patience turning it into an object of culture, an intimate companion for daily life. It's a quiet alchemy, turning nature's bounty into a testament to human ingenuity and artistry. The next time you see a deer, perhaps you'll spare a thought for its ancestors, whose shed antlers might have ended up being meticulously carved into a beautiful Viking comb destined to travel far and last for centuries. Having selected the choicest piece of red deer antler, or perhaps a sturdy section of cattle bone, our Viking comb maker isn't ready to just start carving intricate designs. Oh no, first comes the less glamorous but equally essential stage of roughing out the basic shape, and for that you need the right tools. The Viking Age workshop, whether a dedicated space in a bustling town like Hedeby or a corner of a farmstead's outbuilding, would have been equipped with a surprisingly specialized toolkit. Forget power tools and laser cutters. This was all about skilled hands and finely honed metal. Let's peer into this imaginary workshop. It's probably a bit cluttered with shavings of antler and bone dusting the workbench and floor. There might be a small forge nearby if the comb maker also fashioned or maintained their own tools, though often tool making was a separate specialization. The air would carry the faint, distinctive smell of worked antler, a dry, slightly chalky scent perhaps, with a hint of something almost like burnt hair if friction got too high during sawing. The primary tools for shaping these materials would have been various knives, saws, and drills. Knives were ubiquitous in the Viking Age, carried by almost everyone for all sorts of daily tasks. The comb maker, however, would have had a selection of them, not just a general-purpose blade. There would be sturdier knives for splitting and roughly shaping the raw material, and finer, more delicate blades for detailed carving and finishing work. These knives were typically made of iron sometimes, with a steel edge forge welded on for better sharpness and durability. You can imagine the craftsman pausing frequently to sharpen a blade on a whetstone, the rhythmic rasp, a familiar sound in the workshop. A dull knife is a dangerous and inefficient tool, a timeless truth for any artisan. Then come the saws. These weren't the large, two-person lumber saws you might picture. For comb making, especially for cutting the teeth, very fine-bladed saws were required. Archaeologists have found small iron saw blades, some remarkably thin, that would have been set into wooden or bone handles. Creating a saw capable of making such precise, closely spaced cuts in tough antler was a testament to the skill of the Viking blacksmiths. The set of the saw teeth, the way they are angled alternately left and right, would have been crucial to prevent the blade from binding in the cut. Just picture the patience required slowly and carefully guiding that tiny saw ensuring each tooth slot was uniform in depth and spacing. One slip and you could ruin hours of work. It's enough to make your own shoulders tense up just thinking about it. Drills were also essential, particularly for making the rivet holes in composite combs, which we'll discuss in more detail later, and for creating decorative patterns like the common ring and dot motif. Viking Age drills were typically of the bow drill or pump drill variety. A bow drill uses a bow with a loose string wrapped around the drill shaft. Moving the bow back and forth rotates the drill bit. A pump drill has a flywheel and a crossbar that moves up and down the shaft, spinning it. Both types allowed for controlled and relatively rapid drilling, even in hard materials like antler. The drill bits themselves would have been made of iron, carefully shaped and sharpened for their task. Imagine the whirring sound, the little puff of bone dust as the bit bites in. Files and rasps made of iron with cut teeth would also have been used for smoothing surfaces, shaping curves, and refining the final form of the comb before polishing. These would have come in various shapes and coarseness, from rough rasps for quickly removing material to finer files for more delicate adjustments. You can almost feel the gritty texture of a rasp against antler, slowly revealing the desired shape within the raw material. It's a subtractive art like sculpture, where the final form is found by taking away everything that isn't the comb. A mainstream historical fact is that many of these tool types, small saws, knives, drill bits, have been found in archaeological contexts alongside unfinished combs and the waste material debitage from comb production. This provides direct evidence of the manufacturing process and the tools employed. Places like the Coppergate excavation in York have yielded entire workshop floors, frozen in time, offering an incredible snapshot of Viking Age craft. It's like the comb maker just stepped out for a lunch break 1,000 years ago. Now for a quirky or perhaps just impressively resourceful tidbit. It's believed that some of the polishing and fine abrasive work might have been done using materials like horsetail reeds, equisetum. These plants contain silica in their stems, giving them a naturally abrasive quality. Rubbing a piece of antler with a bundle of dried horsetail could create a surprisingly smooth finish. It's a wonderful example of using readily available natural resources. Think of it as Viking Age sandpaper provided by Mother Nature. No need for a trip to the hardware store when the local marsh has what you need. Just nipping out to get some equisetum deer. The Jarl's new comb needs a bit more of a shine. Historians still argue whether individual comb makers typically performed every stage of the process, from sourcing raw material to final polishing and decoration, or if there was a greater degree of specialization within the craft. For example, did some artisans focus only on cutting teeth, while others specialized in decorative carving? In larger urban workshops, some division of labor seems plausible, allowing for greater efficiency and the development of highly specific skills. However, in smaller, more rural settings, the comb maker might well have been a one-person operation. It's a debate that highlights the varying scales of production in the Viking world. The workbench itself would have been a sturdy, probably wooden affair, perhaps with notches or clamps to hold the antler steady during sawing or drilling. Good lighting would have been crucial, so the workbench might have been positioned near a window or an opening in the wall, or work might have been done outdoors in good weather. In the dim interiors of many Viking-age buildings, making the most of natural light was essential for any kind of detailed craftwork. You can picture the craftsman hunched over brow, furrowed in concentration, the only sounds the scrape of a file or the whisper of a fine saw. It's a scene of intense focus, a quiet dedication to transforming a humble piece of antler into an object of both beauty and utility. These weren't just tools. They were extensions of the craftsman's hands and skill conduits for their creative intent. Each scrape, each cut, each drilled hole was a step closer to the finished piece. So, our Viking comb maker is kitted out with an impressive array of hand tools, fine saws, sharp knives, sturdy drills. But tools are useless without raw materials. You can't just pop down to the local Antlers R Us. Though, what a missed entrepreneurial opportunity for some enterprising Viking that would have been. No securing a steady supply of high-quality antler and bone was a crucial first step and sometimes an adventure in itself. The quest for antler, particularly the prized red deer antler, often meant heading into the wilderness. Red deer shed their antlers annually, usually in the late winter or early spring. So you can imagine a craftsman, or perhaps a dedicated supplier, venturing into the forests and moorlands as the snows begin to recede. They'd be scanning the forest floor, looking among the leaf litter and undergrowth for these shed treasures. It's not as simple as it sounds. Shed antlers can be surprisingly well camouflaged, and other creatures like rodents enjoy gnawing on them for their calcium content. So finding them intact and in good condition required a keen eye and a bit of luck. You'd be competing with squirrels for prime crafting supplies, a truly epic battle of wits. This wasn't a casual stroll in the park. The forests of Scandinavia and northern Europe were vast wild places home to wolves, bears, and perhaps, according to folklore, less natural denizens. The person collecting antlers would need to be skilled in woodcraft, able to navigate, find shelter, and perhaps even hunt for their own food if the trip took several days. They'd be carrying not just a sack for their finds, but also provisions and tools for survival. It's a far cry from simply ordering supplies online, isn't it? Just wrestling this bear for a particularly fine tine should be back in the workshop by Thursday. Alternatively, deer could be hunted not just for their meat and hides, but also for their antlers, especially if a craftsman needed a specific type or quantity not readily available from shed finds. Hunting deer was a skilled endeavor, requiring patience, tracking ability, and proficiency with a bow or spear. This, of course, brought its own set of challenges and dangers, but the reward of fresh, high-quality antler still attached to the skull and thus undamaged by weathering or gnawing would have been highly prized. For bone, the sourcing was a bit more straightforward, if a little messier. The primary source would be the remains of butchered domestic animals, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and horses. After a feast or a routine slaughter for preserving meat for the winter, the bones would be available. Our comb maker might have an arrangement with local farmers or the settlement's butcher. They'd be looking for the larger, straighter limb bones, which offer thicker sections of cortical bone suitable for crafting. You can picture them sorting through a pile of fresh bones, still greasy, perhaps selecting the most promising pieces. It's not the most fragrant part of the job, but essential nonetheless. One person's leftover dinner scraps are another person's raw artistic medium. The mainstream historical fact here is that archaeological evidence from Viking settlements often shows large collections of antler, both shed and unshed, and worked bone fragments in areas identified as craft workshops. For instance, at the Viking trading town of Berka in Sweden, substantial deposits of antler, including many pieces of red deer and elk antler, indicate a thriving industry. Some of this antler was clearly imported, as red deer were not native to that specific area of Sweden in such numbers, highlighting the extent of trade networks even for raw materials. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit, there's some speculation among historians that particularly fine antlers, perhaps those with unusual tine formations or exceptional size, might have been seen as having almost magical properties or being especially lucky. If an artisan acquired such a piece, it might have been reserved for a particularly important commission, perhaps a comb for a chieftain or a renowned warrior. While direct proof is elusive, given the Vikings' belief in omens and the power of natural objects, it's a fascinating thought that the raw material itself could carry an extra layer of significance beyond its physical properties. Imagine finding an antler that looks vaguely like Mjolnir. You'd definitely save that for something special. Historians still argue whether comb makers were typically full-time specialists who relied entirely on their craft for their livelihood, or if comb making was often a seasonal or part-time activity, perhaps undertaken by farmers during the quieter agricultural months. In large urban centers like Jorvik or Hedeby, full-time specialization seems very likely with dedicated workshops and a constant demand. However, in more rural areas, a skilled individual might have produced combs alongside other farming or craft activities. The answer probably varies depending on the specific location and time period within the long Viking age. Just finished shearing the sheep now for a spot of intricate antler carving before the evening milking. The transportation of these raw materials back to the workshop also presented challenges. Antlers are bulky and awkwardly shaped. A successful antler gathering expedition might result in a heavy load to be carried back, perhaps on a pack horse, if available, or simply on one's own back. Bone, while perhaps sourced more locally from within the settlement, would still need to be moved to the workshop. Every step from finding the antler in the deep woods to carrying it to the workbench was part of the process, requiring effort and planning. You can almost feel the anticipation of the craftsman returning with a good haul, spreading out the newly acquired antlers and bones, assessing their potential, already visualizing the combs that might emerge from them. Each piece holds a promise. This gnarled tine might become a set of sturdy tooth plates. That smooth section of leg bone could form the side pieces of a handsome composite comb. It's a moment of potential where nature's raw offering meets the artisan's vision. This careful selection and acquisition of materials underscores the respect for the natural world inherent in many traditional crafts. It's not about mass consumption, but about a thoughtful and resourceful use of what the environment provides. The journey to find the antler is as much a part of the comb's story as the intricate carving that will later adorn it. So you've braved the wilds, perhaps, outwitted a few squirrels or struck a deal with the local butcher, and now you, our diligent Viking comb maker, have a promising pile of antler and bone at your workshop. But you can't just grab a piece and start sawing away at those intricate teeth. Raw antler, especially if it's been lying on the forest floor for a while, or fresh bone, needs preparation. This stage of prepping nature's bounty is all about patience and understanding the material, transforming it from its raw state into something clean, stable, and ready to be worked. First, let's consider antler. If it's shed antler, it might be dirty with caked on, earth moss, or other forest debris. It might also be quite dry and brittle. The first step would likely be a good cleaning. This could involve scrubbing with water and perhaps sand or a coarse bundle of twigs to remove surface dirt. You want a clean surface to work with both for hygiene and to properly assess the quality of the antler beneath. More importantly, antler needs to be softened slightly to make it easier to cut and carve without splitting or excessive tool wear. The traditional method for this was soaking. The antler pieces would be submerged in water for a period potentially several days or even weeks. This process allows the dense antler material to absorb moisture, making it more pliable and less prone to chipping when worked with saws and knives. It's a bit like how woodworkers sometimes steam or soak wood to bend it. You're not trying to make it floppy just to give it a bit more give. Imagine a dedicated trough or barrel in the workshop filled with water and various pieces of antler in different stages of their spa treatment. Is the Jarl's antler ready for its sewing session? Yet apprentice, it's had a good long soak. Bone also requires careful preparation. Fresh bone will have marrow inside and often remnants of fat and sinew clinging to the outside. These need to be removed. The marrow could be scooped out. Marrow was a valuable food source, so it likely wouldn't go to waste. Then the bones would need to be thoroughly cleaned of any remaining soft tissue. This might involve scraping, boiling, or even burying the bones for a time to allow natural decomposition and insects to do some of the work. Boiling not only helps to clean the bone, but also to degrease it, which is important because any remaining fat could interfere with the crafting process or cause the finished comb to become discolored or rancid over time. You want your comb to be a delightful grooming accessory, not a forgotten snack for a passing dog. After soaking for antler or cleaning and degreasing for bone, the material would need to be dried to some extent, but not so much that it becomes overly brittle, again, especially for antler. It's a delicate balance learning through experience just how damp or dry the material should be for optimal working. Too wet, and it might clog the saw. Too dry, and it might splinter. Our craftsmen would have developed a feel for this, perhaps testing a small piece before committing to a larger section. The mainstream historical fact here is that the process of soaking antler to make it workable is a technique known from ethnographic studies of other cultures that traditionally worked with antler, and archaeological finds of antler working sites often include features that could be interpreted as soaking pits or troughs. Experimental archaeology, where modern craftspeople replicate ancient techniques, has also confirmed the efficacy of soaking antler. It significantly reduces the effort needed to saw and carve it. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some historical accounts, though not specifically Viking, mention the use of urine for soaking and softening materials like horn or antler. Urea present in urine can act as a plasticizer. While direct evidence for Vikings using this specific method for combs is scarce, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility given their resourceful nature and the known practices in other contemporary or later cultures for working similar materials. It certainly adds a rather pungent aroma to our imagined workshop, doesn't it? Perhaps it's best we stick to the image of fresh, clean water for their antler spa. Remember to use the old urine for the antlers. Sven not the fresh stuff. We're not savages. Historians still argue whether certain recipes or additives were used in the soaking water to improve the process. Were specific types of leaves, bark rich in tannins perhaps, or even mild acidic substances like fermented liquids, sometimes added to the soaking bath to achieve particular effects on the antler's workability or even its color. Such practices are known in other traditional crafts, but concrete evidence for Viking comb makers is elusive, leaving it a topic for speculation and ongoing research. It's the kind of detail that often doesn't make it into the sagas, but would have been vital craft knowledge. Once the antler or bone is suitably prepared, cleaned, softened if antler, and at the right moisture level, it's ready for the next stage, being cut into the basic forms, the blanks from which the comb will eventually emerge. This preparation phase, though not as visually exciting as carving intricate patterns, is absolutely fundamental. A poorly prepared piece of material will fight the craftsman every step of the way, leading to frustration, broken tools, and a subpar product. Patience here pays dividends later. You can picture the craftsman carefully selecting a piece of now pliable antler from its soaking bath. It feels different in the hand now, slightly yielding the surface cool and damp. Or they might pick up a clean, dry piece of long bone, dense and smooth. The transformation has begun. The raw, sometimes messy offering from nature is slowly being coaxed through these patient, often unglamorous steps towards its new life as a useful and beautiful object. It's a quiet dialogue between the artisan and the material, understanding its properties, respecting its limits, and preparing it for the more dramatic shaping that is to come. It's the culinary equivalent of mise en place. Everything prepared and ready before the real cooking begins. This careful prep work sets the stage for the true artistry. The antler has had its lengthy, luxurious soak, emerging pliable and cooperative. The bone, degreased and pristine, lies ready. Now, with the raw materials suitably prepped, our Viking comb maker moves to the next crucial phase, shaping the comb blank. This is where the rough, often irregular pieces of antler or bone begin their transformation into the foundational elements of what will become a comb. It's a process requiring foresight, a good eye for maximizing the yield from each precious piece of material, and a steady hand with the saw. Imagine the craftsman selecting a tine of red deer antler. These tines are naturally tapered and curved. The first task is often to saw off segments of a suitable length for the comb plates. If it's a single-piece comb, being planned, a relatively flat and wide section of antler or bone is needed. More commonly, especially in the Viking Age, combs were composite, made from several smaller pieces riveted together. For these, the artisan would be looking to cut rectangular or slightly wedge-shaped plates that will form the tooth-bearing part of the comb, and other, often more decorative plates for the connecting side pieces. The main tool for this initial shaping is again the saw. Not the ultra-fine tooth-cutting saw yet, but a slightly larger, sturdier saw capable of cutting through the thickness of the antler or bone. The craftsman would carefully mark out the intended cuts, perhaps with a scriber or a charcoal mark, planning to get as many usable plates as possible from a single tine or bone, minimizing waste. Antler and good quality bone were valuable resources not to be squandered. You can almost hear the rhythmic rasp of the saw, a steady back and forth motion as the craftsman carefully follows their marked lines. Small adjustments in angle might be needed to accommodate the natural curve of the antler. If working with a long bone, the craftsman would first need to split it open to access the solid cortical bone. This might be done with a heavier knife and a mallet, carefully striking to cleave the bone along its length. Once split, the curved sections of cortical bone could then be flattened further or sawn into the required plate shapes. It's a bit like a preliminary sketch before the detailed drawing. These initial cuts define the rough outline and potential of the piece. The goal at this stage is to produce a set of relatively uniform, flat or slightly curved blanks or plates. For a typical composite comb, you might need 2, 3, or even more tooth plates, which will sit side by side, and 2 longer, often more substantial side plates that will sandwich the tooth plates and hold the whole assembly together with rivets. The thickness of these plates is important. Too thin and they'll be weak; too thick and the comb will be clunky. The craftsman is constantly making these judgments based on the specific piece of material and the intended design of the comb. This process generates a fair amount of waste. Sawdust, small offcuts, and irregularly shaped pieces not suitable for plates. However, even this waste might not be entirely discarded. Smaller bone or antler fragments could be used for other crafts, like making needles pins, gaming pieces, or even crushed to make bone meal for fertilizer. The Vikings were generally not a throwaway society. Resourcefulness was key to survival and prosperity. You can imagine a small pile of these offcuts accumulating, perhaps to be sorted through later for other potential uses. Waste not, want not was probably an unspoken motto in many a Viking workshop. Maybe the apprentice gets the job of sorting the potentially useful pile from the definitely just dust pile. The mainstream historical fact is that archaeological sites with evidence of comb making, such as the workshops at Ribe in Denmark or Dublin in Ireland, often contain large quantities of sawn antler and bone offcuts, sometimes called trial pieces or manufacturing waste. These fragments, showing saw marks and initial shaping attempts, are invaluable to archaeologists for reconstructing the step-by-step process of comb manufacture. They can even show mistakes pieces that were started and then abandoned, giving a very human insight into the learning process and quality control of the ancient craftsman. For a quirky or perhaps ingenious tidbit, it's thought that the natural curve of an antler tine was sometimes intentionally incorporated into the design of the comb, particularly for single-piece combs or the connecting side plates of composite combs. Rather than fighting the material to make everything perfectly flat, the craftsman might embrace the gentle curve, which could even make the comb fit more comfortably in the hand or against the scalp. This shows an adaptive approach, working with the inherent qualities of the material, rather than always trying to impose a rigid, preconceived form. It's a subtle form of collaboration between artisan and antler. Historians still argue whether specialized jigs or templates were commonly used at this stage to ensure uniformity in the size and shape of the comb plates, especially in workshops producing larger quantities of combs. While direct evidence of such jigs, which would likely have been made of wood and thus rarely survive, is scarce, the consistency seen in some batches of finished combs suggests that some form of guide or standardized measurement was likely employed to speed up the process and ensure a more regular product. Or perhaps it was just the incredibly practiced eye and hand of a master craftsman. Another batch of perfectly identical tooth plates, Bjorn. You've either got a magic jig or you are the jig. Once these blanks, the nascent tooth plates and side plates, are sawn to their rough dimensions, they might undergo some initial smoothing with a file or rasp. The saw marks will be removed and the edges trued up. They don't need to be perfectly finished yet, but they need to be regular enough to fit together neatly for the next stages of drilling rivet holes and, most importantly, cutting the teeth. You can picture the craftsman laying out the freshly cut plates on the workbench. A collection of pale rectangular or slightly curved pieces of antler or bone damp from the soaking or cool from their recent separation from a larger piece. They are no longer just raw material. They are now clearly destined to become parts of a comb. The initial, often messy work of breaking down the bulk material is done. Now the focus shifts to refinement and the more intricate work that will bring the comb to life. Each plate is a blank canvas holding the potential for the fine teeth and perhaps decorative flourishes that will define its final character. The journey from forest floor or butcher's yard to this collection of neat, promising blanks has been one of patience and careful if unglamorous labor. The comb blanks, those neatly sawn plates of antler or bone, lie expectantly on the workbench. They are smooth, regular, and full of promise. Now comes the defining moment for any comb, the step that transforms a mere sliver of material into a functional grooming tool, cutting the teeth. This is where precision becomes paramount, where the craftsman's skill with a saw is truly tested. You can imagine a hush falling over the workshop, a deeper level of concentration settling upon our artisan. This is not a task to be rushed. For a composite comb, the tooth plates, those rectangular pieces we saw being cut, would typically be clamped together side by side, sometimes along with the connecting side plates, if they were also to have teeth, though often side plates were left plain or decorated differently. Clamping them firmly ensured that the teeth would be cut consistently across all plates, simultaneously creating a uniform row once the comb was assembled. This was a clever bit of Viking efficiency. Imagine trying to cut perfectly aligned teeth on 3 or 4 separate plates individually. A recipe for frustration and a comb that looked like it had a bad haircut itself. The saw used for cutting the teeth was a very special tool. As we touched on earlier, it needed to have a very thin blade and fine, sharp teeth. These saws were marvels of Viking Age metallurgy and tool-making. The craftsman would grip the saw firmly, perhaps, with a two-handed grip for better control if the saw handle was designed for it, and begin the first cut at one end of the clamped set of plates. Each stroke had to be steady and true. The saw held at a consistent angle to ensure the teeth were perpendicular to the edge of the comb blank. The spacing of the teeth was crucial. For a general-purpose comb, the teeth might be moderately spaced. For a fine-toothed comb intended for removing lice or for very smooth grooming, the teeth would be incredibly close together. Marking out this spacing beforehand would have been essential. Perhaps the craftsman used a ruler-like guide or a multi-pronged marking tool to score tiny indentations where each cut should begin. Or with enough experience they might have relied on a highly developed sense of rhythm and spacing each cut, following the last in a precise cadence. You can almost hear the whisper-thin zeek, zeek, zeek of the saw as it bites into the antler, each sound marking the birth of another tooth. The depth of the cuts also had to be consistent. If the teeth were of uneven length, the comb would be less effective and aesthetically unpleasing. This required careful control of the saw's penetration. Too shallow, and the teeth wouldn't function well. Too deep, and you risk weakening the spine of the comb plate. It's a delicate balance maintained cut after cut, tooth after tooth. Imagine the intense focus, the eyes narrowed following the almost invisible line of the saw blade. Any distraction could lead to a misplaced cut, potentially ruining the entire set of plates. No pressure. Right Just don't mess up this piece of antler you spent days sourcing and prepping. Once all the vertical cuts were made, creating a series of closely spaced parallel slots, the material between these slots needed to be removed to define the individual teeth. This might be done by making angled cuts from the edge of the blank down to the base of the vertical saw cuts, or by carefully breaking away the thin slivers of material between the main cuts. Sometimes a knife or a fine chisel-like tool might be used to clean out the spaces between the teeth and refine their shape, tapering them slightly towards the points for a smoother passage through hair. The mainstream historical fact here is that microscopic analysis of Viking age combs reveals the tool marks left by this process, saw striations within the tooth slots, and sometimes chatter marks from the saw provide direct physical evidence of how the teeth were cut. The regularity and fineness of the teeth on many surviving examples are astonishing, given that they were produced entirely by hand with simple tools. It speaks volumes about the skill and patience of these artisans. And now, for a quirky or rather mind-boggling tidbit, some Viking age combs, particularly the very fine knit combs, have teeth that are incredibly closely spaced, sometimes as many as 10 or more teeth per centimeter. To achieve this level of precision with a handsaw in a material like antler is a feat of extraordinary skill and control. It's the kind of work that would require excellent eyesight, a rock-steady hand, and probably a very calm temperament. You wouldn't want to be doing this after too much strong Viking ale. One sneeze and you've got a gap-toothed comb. Historians still argue about the exact techniques used to achieve such incredible fineness and regularity in tooth cutting. Were there specialized holding devices or guides that haven't survived in the archaeological record? Were specific types of saw blades or tooth setting techniques employed that we haven't fully replicated or understood? While the general principles are known, the highest levels of Viking comb-making finesse still hold some secrets. It's a testament to the fact that ancient craftsmen were capable of achieving results that can baffle us even with our modern technological understanding. After the teeth were cut and the spaces between them cleared, the edges of the tooth plates would be rough. They would need further finishing and smoothing, but the fundamental comb structure was now in place. You can imagine the craftsman unclamping the plates, a little puff of antler dust released. They would hold them up, inspecting the rows of freshly cut teeth, checking for any imperfections, feeling the new texture. That flat, unassuming blank has now gained a new dimension, a new purpose. It has become recognizably a comb. The process might be repeated if the comb was to be double-sided, perhaps with coarser teeth on one side and finer teeth on the other. This would require even more careful planning and execution. Think about the satisfaction of successfully completing this stage. The most technically demanding part of the comb's construction is done. The rest will involve assembly, decoration, and polishing. Important steps, to be sure. But the very soul of the comb, its ability to untangle and smooth, has just been painstakingly carved into existence, one delicate tooth at a time. It's a miniature marvel of engineering and artistry born from a simple saw and a steady hand. The teeth have been meticulously sawn, transforming those humble antler or bone plates into the functional core of a comb. Our Viking artisan might pause, perhaps stretch their shoulders before moving on to the next stage, adding the first touches of decoration. While some combs, particularly those for everyday use by ordinary folk, might have remained relatively plain, Many Viking Age combs were adorned with designs ranging from simple geometric patterns to more elaborate carvings. This wasn't just about making them pretty. Decoration could add to the comb's value, signify something about its owner, or even be thought to imbue it with certain properties. Let's start with the simpler, more common forms of decoration that you'd likely see being applied at this point. One of the most ubiquitous motifs in Viking Age art, found on everything from jewelry to runestones to combs, is the ring and dot or dot and circle pattern. This is exactly what it sounds like, a small circle with a dot at its center. It might seem basic to us, but it was a versatile and widely loved design element. These could be applied individually in rows or grouped together to form more complex patterns. To create these ring and dot motifs, the craftsman would use a specialized tool, perhaps a drill bit with a central point and a surrounding ring or a two-part stamp. More simply, they could use a pair of dividers, one point to scribe the circle and then a punch or a different drill bit for the central dot. Imagine the craftsman carefully pressing or drilling these little circles onto the side plates of a composite comb, or perhaps along the spine of a single-piece comb. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a punch or the whir of a small bow drill would fill the workshop. It's a repetitive action, but one that, when done with care, could transform a plain surface into something much more visually interesting. Another common form of simple decoration was incised line work. Using a sharp knife or a pointed scribing tool, the craftsman could carve straight lines, zigzags, chevrons, or hatched patterns. These lines might run parallel to the edges of the comb, create border around panels of ring and dot motifs, or form simple geometric designs. Sometimes these incised lines were cut quite deeply, creating a textured feel. Other times they were very fine and delicate. You can picture the craftsman's eyes narrowed in concentration, drawing the knife steadily across the surface of the antler, the fine curl of material peeling away. One slip could mar the design, so a steady hand and a confident stroke were essential. These simple decorative techniques were often applied to the connecting side plates of composite combs. Remember those longer, flatter pieces of antler or bone that sandwich the tooth plates? Their broader surfaces offered a perfect canvas for this kind of embellishment. Even a simple pattern of repeating lines or a scattering of ring and dot motifs could elevate the comb from a purely utilitarian object to something with a bit more personality. It's like adding a pinstripe to a suede. A small detail, but it makes a difference. The mainstream historical fact is that these decorative motifs, particularly the ring and dot and simple incised lines, are found on combs from across the entire Viking world, from Scandinavia to the British Isles to Russia. Their widespread use and consistent appearance suggest a shared cultural vocabulary of design, even with regional variations in how they were combined or executed. Archaeologists can sometimes even trace the products of specific workshops or regions by subtle differences in the style or arrangement of these common motifs. And for a quirky tidbit, sometimes these incised lines or dots were filled with a contrasting pigment, often a dark substance like charcoal powder mixed with a binder, perhaps wax or fat, to make the pattern stand out more clearly against the pale antler or bone. This technique, similar to niello, inlay in metalwork, but much simpler, could make even basic geometric designs pop. Imagine a comb with crisp black lines accentuating its form. Quite stylish. It's like the ancient equivalent of using a Sharpie to make your doodles more dramatic but with significantly more artisanal flair. Past the charcoal dusts then, these dots aren't nearly Viking enough. Historians still argue whether the choice and arrangement of these simple decorative patterns had specific symbolic meanings, or if they were primarily aesthetic. While some scholars suggest that certain geometric patterns might have had protective or amuletic significance, perhaps derived from older Germanic art traditions, others see them more as a readily available and easily executed way to enhance the visual appeal of an object. It's possible both are true. A pattern could be pleasing to the eye and carry a subtle layer of meaning understood by those within the culture. The ring and dot, for example, is such an ancient and widespread symbol in many cultures, often associated with the sun or an eye that it's tempting to see more than just decoration in its persistent use. These initial flourishes, even if simple, were an important part of the comb-making process. They added value, demonstrated the craftsman's skill beyond just the basic construction, and personalized the object. Even a comb destined for a less wealthy owner might receive some simple decoration, a testament to the Viking appreciation for crafted objects. It showed care and attention to detail. You can imagine our craftsmen now having completed the tooth cutting, turning their attention to the smoother, broader surfaces of the side plates. With a few well-chosen tools, they begin to lay down these patterns. The work is still precise, but perhaps a little more free-flowing than the rigid demands of tooth cutting. There's a sense of adding character, of giving the comb its first hint of individuality before it's even fully assembled. These dots and lines are the opening notes in the visual song of the comb, a quiet testament to the human desire to make even everyday objects a little more special, a little more beautiful. It's a reminder that even in a world focused on survival and practicality, there was always room for art. The ring and dot motifs are neatly applied. The incised lines crisply define borders and simple patterns. Our Viking comb maker has laid a solid foundation of decoration. But for some combs, particularly those destined for wealthier patrons or perhaps as special gifts, this was just the beginning. Now we enter the realm of masterstrokes, where the craftsman might unleash their full artistic skill, transforming the comb into a miniature work of art with intricate carvings, zoomorphic designs, and perhaps even cryptic runes. This is where the true artistry of the comb maker shines. Moving beyond geometric simplicity, they might begin to carve more complex designs, often drawing from the rich tapestry of Viking Age art styles, such as the Bora gelling, Mammon, Ringerike, and Urnus styles, each with its characteristic animal interlace, gripping beasts and flowing tendrils. These styles, seen on magnificent runestones, intricate metalwork, and elaborate wood carvings, also found their way onto these much smaller personal items. Imagine the challenge of adapting those grand, sweeping artistic conventions to the limited canvas of a comb's side plate. Animal figures were a hugely popular theme. Dragons, wolves, serpents, birds, and unidentifiable gripping beasts. Fantastic creatures whose limbs often intertwined with their own bodies or with other elements of the design writhed and coiled across the surfaces of these combs. These weren't just random doodles of animals. They were often highly stylized, embodying the dynamism and controlled complexity that characterizes Viking art. The craftsman would use fine knives and perhaps specialized carving tools like small gouges or burins to carefully sculpt these figures in low relief. You can picture the intense focus required, slowly revealing a sinuous dragon's body, or the sharp beak of a bird from the flat surface of the antler. Each cut would be precise, removing tiny slivers of material to build up the form and texture. Sometimes these animal carvings were part of an interlaced pattern, where the bodies of creatures wove in and out of each other, or with ribbon-like strands, creating a dense, intricate design that filled the available space. This love of interlace is a hallmark of Viking art, and achieving it on such a small scale in a relatively unforgiving material like antler would have required immense skill and patience. It's like trying to untangle a knot, but you're the one meticulously creating the beautiful ordered chaos. Beyond animals, human figures or faces sometimes appear, though less commonly than on other Viking artifacts. When they do, they are often highly stylized, perhaps representing mythological figures or ancestors. The carving might depict a warrior with a helmet or a face with a prominent beard and staring eyes. These figures add another layer of narrative or symbolic potential to the comb. The mainstream historical fact is that the decorative styles found on Viking combs often mirror the prevailing art styles of their period and region. For example, a comb made in Denmark during the 10th century might exhibit characteristics of the Jelling or Mammon style, while one from 11th century Norway might show Ona's style influences. This allows archaeologists to date combs more accurately and to study the spread and evolution of artistic trends across the Viking world. The combs become tiny artistic time capsules. And for a quickie, or perhaps deeply personal tidbit, some combs bear runic inscriptions that go beyond simple ownership marks. These might be short, poetic phrases, expressions of affection, or even magical charms. For example, a comb found in Lincoln, England bears the inscription, "A comb for the hair. Thorfaster made a good comb." It's a simple statement, but it connects us directly to the maker. Other inscriptions are more enigmatic. Imagine carving runes that whisper a secret blessing or a protective word every time the owner grooms their hair. It's a very intimate form of magic woven into the daily routine. May this comb banish tangles and bad luck in equal measure. Historians still argue about the precise meaning and function of much of this intricate animal symbolism. Were these dragons and gripping beasts purely decorative, a display of artistic virtuosity? Or did they carry specific apotropaic warding of evil or protective meanings for the owner? Given the prevalence of such imagery in Viking art associated with power, protection, and the mythological world, it's highly likely that these creatures were more than just pretty pictures. They may have been seen as active agents imbuing the comb and by extension its owner with some of their power or ferocity. Untangling the exact symbolic grammar of these designs remains a fascinating challenge for scholars. The execution of these masterstrokes would have been time-consuming and demanding. The craftsman would need good, light, sharp tools and an unwavering hand. They might sketch the design lightly onto the antler surface first, or perhaps work from a repertoire of memorized motifs and patterns. The antler itself, with its slight grain and potential for hidden flaws, would present its own challenges. A slip of the knife at this stage could be disastrous, potentially ruining a complex carving that had already taken hours to create. You can imagine the satisfaction, though, as the intricate design finally emerged, transforming the comb from a well-made tool into a true treasure. These highly decorated combs were undoubtedly status symbols. Owning such an object spoke of wealth, taste, and perhaps connections to a skilled artisan capable of such fine work. They were the luxury goods of their day, prized possessions that might be passed down through generations or even buried with their owner as a mark of their standing in life. When you hold a replica of such a comb or see a remarkably preserved original in a museum, you can't help but marvel at the skill condensed into such a small object. It's a testament to the Viking love of intricate beauty, a beauty that could be fierce and dynamic, just like the culture that produced it. These weren't just tools for vanity. They were powerful statements carved in antler and bone. The individual plates are now works of art in their own right. The tooth plates have their neat rows of functional teeth, and the side plates, those longer, more robust pieces, are adorned with everything from simple ring and dot patterns to complex writhing beasts, and perhaps even a cryptic runic message. But a pile of beautifully decorated plates isn't a comb, not yet. The next crucial step is assembling these disparate parts into a strong, cohesive, and functional whole. This is where the Viking comb maker becomes a bit of an engineer, carefully fitting and securing the pieces together, most commonly using metal rivets. This is why most Viking Age combs we find are composite combs, composed of multiple pieces. While single-piece combs carved from a single wider piece of antler or bone did exist, they were generally less common and perhaps less durable for finer tooth designs, as the spine above the teeth could be a weak point. The composite construction, with its separate tooth plates sandwiched between sturdy side plates, offered greater strength and allowed for more efficient use of the raw material. You could use smaller pieces of high-quality antler for the tooth plates where it was most needed, and perhaps slightly less prime material for the side plates. So, our craftsman carefully arranges the pieces. The tooth plates, typically ranging from 2 to 5 or even more, are laid edge to edge. Their ends might need some final trimming or filing to ensure a snug fit. Then, the two decorative side plates are placed on either side, like the bread in a sandwich, encasing the ends of the tooth plates. The alignment has to be perfect. If the plates are misaligned, the comb will be crooked, uncomfortable to use, and aesthetically unpleasing. You can imagine the craftsman squinting, making tiny adjustments, ensuring everything lines up just so. Once the arrangement is satisfactory, it's time to drill the rivet holes. This is another precision task. The holes must pass cleanly through both side plates and the ends of all the tooth plates they are meant to secure. If the drill wanders, or if the holes in different plates don't align perfectly, inserting the rivet will be difficult or impossible. The craftsman would likely use a fine-pointed drill, perhaps a bow drill for good control, and carefully drill a series of holes along the length of the comb, typically 2 or 3 holes per tooth plate section. The number and placement of rivets depended on the size and design of the comb, but enough were needed to ensure a robust construction that could withstand the stresses of daily grooming. After the holes are drilled, it's time to insert the rivets. These were usually made of iron bronze, or occasionally even silver for very high-status combs. The rivets were small metal pins. One end of the pin might already have a small head, or it would be flattened slightly before insertion. The pin was then passed through the aligned holes in the comb plates. The protruding end of the pin on the other side would then be carefully hammered down, either directly against the surface of the side plate or against a small metal washer or rosette, a decorative, often circular metal plate placed under the rivet head. This hammering action, called peening, flares out the end of the rivet, creating a second head and securely clamping all the plates together. You can hear the light, precise tink, tink, tink of the small hammer as the craftsman secures each rivet. The mainstream historical fact here is that the type of metal used for rivets can sometimes help in dating a comb or identifying its region of origin. For example, iron rivets were very common throughout the Viking Age. Bronze rivets, offering a warmer color and better corrosion resistance, were also frequently used, particularly in certain periods or workshops. Silver rivets, of course, indicate a luxury item. The careful, even placement of these rivets is another hallmark of a well-made comb. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes the rivet heads themselves were decorated, or the washers beneath them were given a decorative shape. This turned a purely functional element, the rivet, into another small opportunity for embellishment. Imagine tiny domed bronze rivet heads gleaming against the pale antler, or star-shaped washers adding an extra sparkle. It's another example of the Viking attention to detail, where even the nuts and bolts, or rather rivets and plates of an object, could be enhanced. It's like having fancy custom lug nuts on your car. Most people won't notice, but those who do appreciate the extra touch. Historians still argue about the exact sequence of decoration and assembly. Were the side plates fully decorated before assembly? Or was some of the finer carving or incised line work done after the comb was riveted together? Decorating before assembly might be easier for accessing all surfaces, but risks damaging the decoration during the riveting process. Decorating after assembly ensures the design flows cohesively across the joined plates, but might be more awkward for the craftsman. It's likely that a combination of approaches was used, perhaps with basic shaping and some robust decoration done pre-assembly and finer details or touch-ups added afterwards. Should I carve the dragon's nostril before or after I hammer this bronze pin next to its eye? Decisions. Once all the rivets are securely pinned, the comb is finally a single solid object. The craftsman would test its strength, giving it a gentle flex, ensuring there was no looseness or play between the plates. The assembled comb would then likely undergo some further shaping and smoothing along the edges where the different plates meet, to ensure a comfortable feel in the hand and a seamless transition between the parts. A file or rasp might be used to even out any slight misalignments. This assembly process, while seemingly straightforward, required considerable skill. The careful drilling, the precise alignment, the controlled hammering of the rivets, all contributed to the final quality and longevity of the comb. A well-assembled comb could last for many years, perhaps even generations, while a poorly assembled one might quickly become loose and fall apart. You can picture the craftsman holding the newly assembled comb, feeling its satisfying solidity. The individual elements, each prepared and decorated with care, have now come together to fulfill their shared purpose. The sum is truly greater than its parts, a testament to the thoughtful engineering that underpins the art. The comb is now fully assembled. The tooth plates are firmly sandwiched between their decorated sidekicks, all held together by a series of sturdy metal rivets. It looks like a comb, it feels like a comb, but it's not quite finished yet. The surfaces might still be a little rough from handling and the assembly process. The edges where the plates meet might not be perfectly smooth. The final stage before this carefully crafted object is ready to tame a Viking beard or a shield maiden's braids is polishing. This is where the comb acquires its final gleam, its pleasing tactile smoothness, and its true aesthetic appeal. Polishing was not just about making the comb shiny, it was also about comfort and hygiene. A smooth surface would glide more easily through the hair, reducing snagging and pulling. It would also be less likely to trap dirt or oils, making the comb easier to keep clean. So this final step was both practical and aesthetic, adding the finishing touch that signifies a quality piece of craftsmanship. You wouldn't want to present a jarl with a comb that felt like fine grit sandpaper, would you? It's exfoliating, my lord. Probably not a good career move. The polishing process would likely have involved several stages using progressively finer, abrasive materials. After any final shaping with files, to ensure all the assembled parts flowed together smoothly, the craftsman might begin with a relatively coarse abrasive to remove any remaining tool marks or scratches. This could be something like sandstone, or perhaps a coarse cloth or piece of leather charged with sand or crushed pumice. The comb would be rubbed methodically, ensuring all surfaces, the flat sides of the connecting plates, the spine above the teeth, and even carefully the surfaces of the teeth themselves, were treated. Once the initial roughness was removed, the craftsman would move to finer abrasives. We mentioned earlier the possible use of horsetail reeds, equisetum, which contain silica and act as a natural fine abrasive. Bundles of dried horsetail could be rubbed vigorously against the antler or bone, gradually smoothing the surface to a soft sheen. It's a wonderfully resourceful use of a common plant. You can imagine the rhythmic rustling sound as the reeds work their magic. Other fine abrasives might have included powdered chalk, fine clay, or even special types of rotten stone, a decomposed siliceous limestone mixed with water or a little oil to form a polishing paste. The craftsman would rub this paste onto the comb with a piece of cloth or soft leather, working it into all the nooks and crannies of any carved decoration. This would take time and patience, gradually bringing out the natural luster of the antler or bone. The final buffing might be done with a soft, clean piece of leather, perhaps sheepskin, with the wool still on, or even just with the palm of the hand. This would remove any residue from the polishing compounds and bring the surface to its final smooth and often slightly glossy finish. Antler, in particular, can take on a beautiful warm patina with enough dedicated polishing, its surface almost glowing. Bone, too, can be polished to a pleasing smoothness. The mainstream historical fact is that many surviving Viking Age combs show a high degree of polish, especially on the non-decorated surfaces. This smoothness is not just a result of wear from use over time, though that contributes to the patina of ancient objects, but is clearly an intentional part of the manufacturing process. The care taken in this final finishing stage is evident in the quality of the artifacts that have come down to us. Now, for a quirky and slightly waxy tidbit, it's believed that beeswax might have sometimes been used as a final finishing agent. After the mechanical polishing, a thin coat of beeswax rubbed onto the comb and then buffed could provide a protective layer, enhance the shine, and even give the comb a pleasant subtle scent and a smoother feel. Beeswax was a readily available material in the Viking Age, used for many purposes from waterproofing to candle making. Using it to give a final loving touch to a comb seems perfectly in character with their resourceful and craft-conscious nature. just needs a quick buff with the old beeswax, and this beauty is ready to face the fiercest Nordic winds and the tangles they create. Historians still argue about the exact range of polishing materials and techniques routinely available to and used by Viking comb makers. While we can infer much from experimental archaeology and the condition of surviving artifacts, the precise recipes for polishing compounds or the specific types of leather or cloth preferred for buffing are details that are hard to reconstruct with certainty. Were there secret tricks of the trade passed down from master to apprentice for achieving that perfect, long-lasting sheen? It's very likely. You can imagine the craftsman holding the now fully polished comb up to the light, turning it this way and that, admiring the way the light plays off its smooth surfaces and highlights the carved details. The cool, dense feel of the polished antler in the hand would be a source of quiet satisfaction. All the preceding stages, the sourcing and prepping of the material, the sewing of the blanks, the meticulous cutting of the teeth, the intricate decoration, and the careful assembly, have led to this moment. The comb is now complete, a perfect fusion of form and function. This final polishing wasn't just a mechanical process. It was an act of care, ensuring the comb was not only effective and durable, but also a pleasure to hold and use. It's the last goodbye from the maker before the comb goes out into the world to begin its working life. This attention to the tactile quality of the object is something that often gets lost in mass-produced items today. But for the Viking craftsman, the way an object felt in the hand was as important as how it looked or worked. The smooth, reassuring presence of a well-polished comb would have been a small, daily comfort. The comb, now polished to a warm gleam, sits finished on the workbench. It's a testament to hours, perhaps even days of patient labor. But what about the person who made it? What was the daily life of a Viking comb maker like? And what was there standing within the bustling hierarchical society of the Viking age? While the sagas tend to focus on kings, warriors, and explorers, the artisans and craftspeople were the essential backbone of any thriving settlement. Let's try to picture the comb maker's workshop again. If they were in a town like Jovik, York, Hedeby, or Birka, their workshop might be a small, dedicated structure, perhaps part of a row of similar artisan dwellings and workplaces. These urban centers were densely packed with narrow lanes and buildings made primarily of wood, wattle, and daub, or turf. The workshop wouldn't have been spacious or luxurious. It would be a functional space filled with the tools of the trade: saws, knives, drills, files, polishing leathers, and the raw materials, piles of antler, stacks of bone, perhaps a trough for soaking. Shavings and dust from antler and bone would likely coat most surfaces, creating a distinctive white or creamy layer. You'd probably find our craftsmen or craftswomen, as women were also involved in various crafts, hunched over a sturdy wooden bench, perhaps near a window or doorway, to catch the precious natural light. The sounds of the workshop would be relatively quiet compared to a blacksmith's forge or a carpenter's yard. The rasp of a saw, the tap of a small hammer, riveting plates, the scrape of a file, the whir of a bow drill. These would be the dominant noises. The smell, as we've imagined, would be a unique blend of dry antler, perhaps a hint of the soaking solution, and maybe beeswax, if that was being used for polishing. It wouldn't be an unpleasant smell, just distinctive, like the particular scent of a woodworker's shop or a leather tannery. The comb maker's day would likely start early to make the most of daylight especially during the shorter winter days in Scandinavia. Their work required precision and good visibility. The tasks would vary depending on what stage of production they were in. One day might be spent entirely on sourcing or preparing raw materials, another on the repetitive but crucial task of cutting teeth, and yet another on the more artistic pursuit of carving intricate decorations. It wasn't an assembly line. It was a holistic craft where one person or a small team in a larger workshop would often see the product through from raw material to finished object. Their social standing would have been that of a skilled artisan. In a society that valued well-made goods, both for practical use and as status symbols, a good comb maker would have been respected. They weren't at the top of the social hierarchy like the jarls and chieftains, nor were they warriors gaining fame on the battlefield. But they were a vital part of the economic and social fabric of the community. They provided essential goods, contributed to the local economy, and their skills helped to define the material culture of their time. You might not write epic poems about Bjorn the Comb Maker, but you'd certainly be glad of his skills when your beard was full of last night's stew. The mainstream historical fact is that in organized Viking towns like Jorvik, distinct craft working areas have been identified through archaeology. For example, Coppergate in York was a hub of activity for various artisans, including metal workers, leather workers, and significantly workers in antler and bone, including comb makers. The sheer volume of manufacturing debris found in these areas indicates that production was often on a significant scale, catering not just to local needs, but also potentially for trade. And now for a quirky or perhaps relatable tidbit, like many artisans throughout history, Viking comb makers probably had to deal with demanding clients. Imagine a wealthy merchant commissioning a special comb. I want it with a dragon, but not like Olaf's dragon. Mine needs to be fiercer. And make sure the teeth are extra fine. My beard is very sensitive. And can I have it by Tuesday for the Althing feast? Some things never change, do they? The pressure of deadlines and discerning customers is a timeless part of being a craftsperson. You can almost hear the comb maker sighing, "Yes, Jarl Sigurd, another gripping beast, of course." Historians still argue about the extent to which comb makers were independent artisans versus being attached to the household of a powerful chieftain or king. In larger centers, independent workshops selling their wares in the marketplace seem likely. However, a particularly skilled craftsman might have been retained by a wealthy patron, ensuring a steady supply of high-quality goods for the patron's family and retinue, and perhaps even as diplomatic gifts. It was probably a mix of both models depending on the craftsman's skill, reputation, and location. The comb maker would have been part of a community of other artisans. They might trade skills or materials or simply share news and gossip. There could have been a degree of friendly rivalry, perhaps each craftsman striving to produce finer work than their neighbors. They would have bought their food and other necessities in the local market, participated in local festivals and religious ceremonies, and lived lives that, while different in technology and custom, were filled with the same human concerns as our own family work community and the desire for a respected place within it. Their hands would have been calloused from the tools, their eyes sharp from years of close work. They would possess an intimate knowledge of their materials, understanding the grain of antler, the density of bone, with an almost intuitive feel. This was knowledge passed down likely through apprenticeships from master to student, ensuring the continuity of the craft. An apprentice might spend years learning the trade, starting with simple tasks like preparing materials or roughing out blanks before gradually being allowed to undertake the more complex work of tooth cutting or decoration. So, as you drift deeper, imagine this artisan not as a remote historical figure, but as a living, breathing person. Their work was not just a job. It was a skill, an art, a contribution. The comb they held in their hand, newly finished, was more than just an object. It was a piece of their time, their effort, and their creative spirit ready to go out into the world and play its small but significant part in the life of another Viking. The meticulously crafted comb, gleaming with its fresh polish, is now ready to leave the workshop. But its journey and its story are far from over. These combs were not just made for local use within the settlement where the artisan lived and worked. Viking combs, particularly the well-made and decorated ones, became sought-after trade goods, traveling far and wide along the extensive network of Viking trade routes. Their discovery in archaeological sites, hundreds, even thousands of miles from their likely place of origin, tells a fascinating tale of commerce, connectivity, and cultural exchange. Imagine a bustling Viking Age marketplace, perhaps in a major trading emporium like Hedeby at the crossroads of Baltic and North Sea routes, or Dublin, a key Viking hub in the Irish Sea. Merchants display their wares furs from the North silks, from the East wine, from the Frankish kingdoms, pottery, glassware, metalwork, and among these collections of finely crafted antler and bone combs. Traders, sailors, and local townsfolk would browse, haggle, and purchase. A comb, lightweight and durable, would have been an ideal item for a traveling merchant to carry, not taking up too much space, but offering good value. These combs traveled along the same routes as the more famous Viking longships, but often in the holds of broader, more capacious cargo vessels called nars. They journeyed across the stormy North Sea to England, Ireland, and Scotland. They sailed east into the Baltic, reaching the lands of the Slavs and Balts, and from there, via the great rivers of Eastern Europe like the Dnieper and the Volga, they could travel as far as Byzantium, Constantinople, and even the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East. It's quite a thought, isn't it? A comb crafted in a small workshop in, say, Ribe, Denmark, might end up grooming the beard of a Varangian god in Constantinople, or being traded for silver dirhams in a bustling Russian river town. The archaeological evidence for this wide distribution is compelling. Viking-style combs or combs made with Viking techniques and materials like red deer, antler, which might not be locally available, in all find locations have been unearthed in an astonishing range of places. They are found in Scandinavian settlements in Greenland and even famously at Lance aux Meadows in Newfoundland, North America. Evidence of the Vikings' remarkable reach. They are common in the Danelaw regions of England, in the Norse settlements of Scotland and the Isles, and throughout Ireland. Further afield, they appear in sites in Poland, Russia, Ukraine, and along the trade routes leading towards the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. The mainstream historical fact here is that the chemical analysis of the antler used in combs, specifically stable isotope analysis, can sometimes help to pinpoint the geographical region where the deer originally lived. This provides powerful evidence for long-distance trade, as a comb found in, say, Iceland might be made from antler sourced from Norway or even further afield. It's like a made-in label written in the very fabric of the artifact. And for a quirky or perhaps just very practical tidbit, it's possible that combs were sometimes traded not just as finished products, but also as blanks or semi-finished goods. A workshop might specialize in mass-producing undecorated comb plates, which could then be traded to other regions where local artisans would finish them, perhaps adding locally specific decorative styles or assembling them with different types of rivets. This would be an efficient way to distribute the labor and cater to diverse regional tastes. Think of it as the Viking Age IKEA flat pack comb, but requiring significantly more skill to assemble than your average mom dresser. Some assembly and intricate carving required. Historians still argue about the precise economic mechanisms driving this trade. Were combs primarily traded as part of a gift exchange system between elites, or were they mostly commodities bought and sold in open markets? The answer is likely a complex mix of both. A particularly fine silver-riveted comb might indeed have been a prestigious gift between chieftains. However, the sheer number of more ordinary yet still well-made combs found suggests a robust market-based trade catering to a wider range of consumers. These weren't all destined for the treasure hoards of kings. Many were simply for people who needed a good comb. The presence of these combs in diverse archaeological contexts also tells us about cultural interaction. Did the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, or the Slavs who acquired Viking combs adopt Viking grooming habits along with the tool? Or were the combs simply valued as exotic or well-made items regardless of their cultural origin? The exchange of goods often leads to an exchange of ideas and customs, and it's fascinating to think of the comb as a small ambassador of Viking culture, traveling silently through different societies. You can picture a merchant carefully packing away a consignment of newly acquired combs, perhaps wrapping them in cloth or moss to protect them during a long sea voyage. Each comb represents an investment, a potential profit, but also a connection between the maker and the eventual unknown owner. The craftsmen in Scandinavia might never know where their handiwork ends up, but through the medium of trade, their skill reaches out across vast distances. The journey of these combs also highlights the interconnectedness of the Viking world. It wasn't an isolated society. It was a dynamic network of trade raiding and settlement that stretched across much of the known world of its time. And everyday objects, like combs, played their part in maintaining these connections, moving along the arteries of commerce, silent witnesses to the voyages and transactions that defined the age. When you see a Viking comb in a museum display case far from the fjords and forests of its origin, remember the incredible journey it likely undertook to get there, a small piece of antler carrying a surprisingly big story of a connected world. The comb has been crafted with skill, perhaps traveled hundreds of miles through bustling trade routes, and served its owner faithfully for years, untangling hair, neatening beards, and maybe even playing a small part in social rituals and personal presentation. But what happened to these combs at the very end of their journey? Remarkably many Viking Age combs didn't just get discarded when they broke or when their owner passed away. They often accompanied their owners into the afterlife, carefully placed in graves as part of the funerary rites. This practice tells us a great deal about the personal and cultural significance these seemingly mundane objects held. Imagine a Viking funeral. It could range from a simple burial in a pit grave to a more elaborate ceremony involving a boat burial or a large burial mound, depending on the status and wealth of the deceased. Alongside the body mourners would place grave goods, items believed to be useful or significant for the deceased in the afterlife, or perhaps simply treasured personal possessions that symbolized their life and identity. These could include weapons for a warrior, tools for a craftsman, jewelry for a wealthy individual, and very frequently personal grooming items like combs. The inclusion of a comb in a grave suggests several things. Firstly, it underscores the idea of the comb as a deeply personal item. Much like a favorite piece of jewelry or a trusted weapon, a comb was something intimately associated with the individual. It had touched their hair, been part of their daily routine, and perhaps even reflected their status or personal style through its material and decoration. To bury it with them was to acknowledge this close connection, ensuring that this personal belonging remained with them even in death. You wouldn't bury someone with a random object. You'd choose things that mattered to them. Secondly, the presence of combs in graves points to a belief that personal appearance and grooming might still matter in the afterlife. The Norse conception of the afterlife, whether Valhalla for warriors slain in battle or hell for others, was often envisioned as a continuation of life in some form. Just as one might need weapons or feasting equipment, perhaps one would also need to keep their hair tidy. It's a rather charming thought, isn't it? Ensuring your ancestors are well groomed for eternity. Don't want to meet Odin with a bird's nest on your head. Now do you, Grandpa? The mainstream historical fact is that combs are one of the most commonly found grave goods in Viking Age burials for both men and women and across different social strata. Their frequent appearance, often found near the head or chest of the deceased, highlights their importance as personal accoutrements. Sometimes multiple combs are found in a single grave, perhaps indicating particular wealth or a special fondness for these items. And for a quirky, or rather poignant, tidbit, some combs found in graves show signs of heavy wear and tear, or even repair. This suggests that these weren't just brand new combs purchased for the funeral, but were the actual combs used by the individual during their lifetime. A tooth might be missing a rivet replaced, or the decoration worn smooth from years of handling. These signs of use make the object even more personal, a tangible link to the daily life of the person who has passed. It's like finding a beloved, well-worn teddy bear tucked in with a child. It speaks volumes about affection and use. Historians still argue about the precise symbolic meaning of combs as grave goods in all contexts. While personal possession and utility in the afterlife are strong possibilities, were there also deeper ritualistic or magical significances? In some mythologies, hair itself has magical properties, and tools associated with hair care might by extension have also carried symbolic weight. Could a comb have been seen as a tool to order or tame not just hair, but perhaps also to help navigate the transition from life to death in an orderly fashion, or to ward off malevolent spirits? The specific beliefs are hard to reconstruct fully, but the consistent practice of including them in burials suggests they were more than just practical afterthoughts. The condition of combs found in graves varies widely. Antler and bone are organic materials, and their preservation depends heavily on the soil conditions. In acidic soils, they might decay completely, leaving only the metal rivets behind. Sometimes archaeologists find just a neat row of rivets and infer that a comb was once there. In well-drained or waterlogged anaerobic conditions, however, combs can survive in remarkably good condition for over 1,000 years, their carvings still crisp, their polish sometimes even faintly discernible. These beautifully preserved examples are treasures offering a direct window into Viking craftsmanship. So the comb, which began as a piece of raw antler shed in a forest or a bone from a butchered animal, has had quite a life. It was sought out, carefully prepared, skillfully shaped and sewn, meticulously decorated, and robustly assembled. It then served a person perhaps for many years, playing its part in their daily life. And finally it was chosen to accompany them on their last journey, a final testament to its value and significance. It's a quiet legacy. These combs don't shout of battles or voyages in the same way a sword or a longship fragment might. But in their humble way, they speak volumes about the daily lives, the artistic sensibilities, the trade networks, and even the spiritual beliefs of the Viking people. They remind us that history is not just made up of grand events, but also of the countless small personal objects that connect us to the people of the past. Each comb is a miniature story waiting to be read by those who know how to look. As we leave our Viking comb maker and the world they inhabited, let this peaceful craft, this surprisingly serene corner of an often turbulent age, linger in your mind. The patient work, the transformation of humble materials into objects of beauty and utility, the journeys these objects undertook, and their final place as companions in eternity. And so, dear friends, our journey through the surprisingly peaceful world of Viking comb makers draws to a gentle close. We've traveled from the wild forests where antler was sought to the bustling workshops filled with the quiet sounds of creation, and finally to the solemn stillness of the grave where these personal treasures found their lasting rest. You've imagined the feel of polished antler cool and smooth in your hand, the rhythmic rasp of the saw, and the intricate beauty of designs carved over 1,000 years ago. Perhaps you've realized that even the most fearsome Viking likely appreciated a good hair day, and that behind the sagas of warriors there were countless artisans patiently shaping the world around them, one useful, beautiful object at a time. These combs, humble yet significant, remind us of the human desire for order, for beauty, and for connection. Connections to our community, to our past, and even to ourselves through the simple act of grooming. As the imagery of the workshop fades and the scent of wood smoke and worked antler recedes into the mists of time, allow yourself to feel that same sense of peace and patient craftsmanship. Let the gentle rhythm of the story guide you towards your own rest. There are no more raids tonight, no more long sea voyages, only the quiet satisfaction of a task completed, a story told. The world of the Viking comb maker, with its quiet focus and dedication, offers a different kind of historical comfort. It's a reminder that even in ages known for their tumult, there were havens of creativity and meticulous care. Let that thought settle over you now as you prepare for sleep. May your own dreams be as intricately woven and as peacefully concluded as the finest Viking comb. Sweet dreams.